In a move that left fans gasping, Kenny Clark, the heartbeat of Green Bay's defense, is headed to Dallas. The words cracked across sports networks like thunder. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, and entire living rooms went silent. The kind of headline that made people stop, mid-sentence, mid-dinner, mid-breath. Kenny Clark, gone. Within seconds, Twitter turned into a battlefield. Fans in Wisconsin sat with jaws on the floor, refreshing their feeds like the next update might prove it was all a mistake. Green Bay loyalists who had watched Clark anchor their defensive line for nearly a decade typed frantically, "This can't be real. What are the Packers thinking?" Others were simply too stunned to speak, staring at their screens, like they'd just seen a ghost. Inside the Packers' locker room, whispers spread like wildfire. Teammates who had bled beside Clark in the trenches felt betrayed, blindsided, as though the very foundation of their defense had been ripped away without warning. Reporters scrambled, rushing to piece together fragments of information. Phones rang endlessly. Sources ducked questions, and every broadcast repeated the same line with equal disbelief. Kenny Clark was no longer a Packer. But the shock didn't stop in Green Bay. Across the country in Dallas, fans exploded with unfiltered excitement. Clark wasn't just any trade. He was a weapon, a statement, a piece of the puzzle that could tilt the balance of the league. Cowboys supporters flooded comment sections with memes, GIFs, bold predictions. The message was clear. This is our year. And yet, beneath the celebration and outrage, one question pulsed through the entire NFL. Why? Why trade away a cornerstone, a leader, a man who represented more than just tackles and sacks? Why would Green Bay let go of someone who embodied loyalty, grit, and quiet strength? Nobody saw this coming, and that was exactly why the story burned through America like wildfire, because this wasn't just a transaction on paper. It was a rupture in trust, a breaking of bonds. A moment that left fans questioning whether the game they loved still honored the values it preached. But to understand why this trade sent shockwaves, you need to know the forces building behind the scenes. Asterisk, for years, Kenny Clark wasn't just a player in Green Bay. He was the soul of the defense, the steady hand in the chaos. Every Sunday, Lambeau Field felt different when number 97 was on the line. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't chasing headlines. He was the kind of anchor who made the stars around him shine brighter. Teammates trusted him, coaches leaned on him, and fans saw in him the embodiment of Wisconsin grit. Quiet, relentless, dependable. Clark had become more than a Pro Bowl talent. He was a fixture of the community. He showed up at schools, sponsored youth programs, donated to local charities without press conferences or cameras. In a state where football isn't just a sport but a lifeline, Clark represented something sacred, a bond between player and people, forged not by contracts but by heart. To Green Bay, he wasn't just a name on the roster. It was family, and that's why the trade felt like betrayal. Fans weren't mourning the loss of a player. They were mourning the tearing of trust. To them, the front office had ripped away not only a defensive cornerstone, but the values that made the Packers feel different from every other NFL franchise. The Packers weren't supposed to be cold and transactional. They were supposed to be about loyalty, tradition. It's the brotherhood that made Lambeau special. The backlash was immediate and emotional. Social media boiled with outrage. Lifelong fans swore off their season tickets. Jersey burnings lit up TikTok. Clips of Clark's highlights ran side by side with captions like "This is what they gave up." Analysts on ESPN and Fox looked stunned on live television. The sentiment echoed. Across every headline, the Packers just broke their own heart. Meanwhile, in Dallas, the story took on a different tone, one drenched in swagger and bravado. Cowboys fans roared, claiming destiny was finally tilting in their favor. The move wasn't just about acquiring a defensive tackle. It was about building a dynasty. Jerry Jones, forever the showman, had struck again. Scooping up one of the NFL's most respected linemen and planting him in the middle of a team hungry to reclaim its fading glory to many. It felt like a villain's play. The Cowboys already carried the aura of arrogance the franchise America loves to hate, Now, with Clark in their arsenal, the perception of Dallas as the league's empire of excess only grew. For Packers fans, it was salt in the wound. Their hero wasn't just gone, he had been delivered. Into the hands of their sport's most polarizing powerhouse, the stakes had never been higher. Green Bay's trust in its leadership was fractured. Dallas was strutting toward what looked like a new golden era. And in the middle of it all stood Kenny Clark, caught between two legacies, the quiet dignity of the Midwest and the blinding spotlight of Texas ambition. But what the world didn't see, at least not yet, were the tensions that had been simmering behind closed doors for months. Contract disputes, private disagreements, subtle signs of a rift between Clark and the Packers front office. They weren't loud, they weren't public, but they were there. It's hidden in plain sight. And when those whispers finally surfaced, it would explode at the worst possible time. Behind the curtain of shock and outrage, a colder story was unfolding. One written not in sweat, loyalty, or sacrifice, but in contracts, cap sheets, and the kind of sterile boardroom logic that drains the humanity out of the game. In Green Bay, the front office had built a reputation for discipline, for shrewd financial maneuvering, for being the rare organization that always knew best. But in this moment, that self-image began to curdle into something darker: arrogance. The whispers began with the phrase, "Every NFL player dreads," salary cap flexibility. To the executives, Kenny Clark wasn't the beating heart of the defense, wasn't the man whose presence made young linemen believe they could fight another down. He was a number, a cap hit, piece on a ledger. The Green Bay front office looked at the spreadsheets and saw not a leader to be honored, but a cost to be managed. Fans could not fathom it. For them, Clark's value was immeasurable. A decade of sweat in the freezing Wisconsin cold, leadership in locker rooms, and an unspoken contract with the community. But in the conference rooms of Lambeau, Clark was reduced to a liability. Executives spoke of restructuring, of financial strategy. Their words sterilized, calculated, and chilling. The contrast was glaring. In the eyes of fans, Clark was family. In the eyes of management, he was an asset depreciating on the balance sheet. This was the brutal reality of the NFL, the truth few wanted to admit. Behind the highlight reels and Sunday pageantry, players were treated as disposable chess pieces. Careers measured in dollars, loyalty weighed against cap space. It was the kind of cold calculus that made billion-dollar franchises run smoothly, and yet hollowed out the soul of the game. The irony ran deep. Green Bay wasn't just any franchise. It was the one owned by the people, the one that sold itself as different, rooted in tradition and community, not greed. Fans had believed that their front office was guided by values beyond money, that the Packers were immune to the ruthless machinery of modern sports. But the decision to trade Clark tore that illusion to shreds. In hushed tones, insiders admitted. The trade was never really about performance. Clark was still dominant, still in his prime, still the anchor of the line. No, this was about leverage. About executives flexing their control, showing they could bend even the most respected player to the will of their cap sheet. It was business masquerading as destiny, numbers dressed up as necessity, and yet the public-facing narrative told a different story. Press releases painted the decision as a forward-looking move, an opportunity to restructure for long-term competitiveness. They spoke of tough choices, of the franchise's responsibility to keep the organization healthy. Words that sounded rational, even inevitable, until you looked at the faces of the fans who had invested their lives in the team. To them, those phrases were daggers, because they knew what was really being said. Loyalty doesn't matter. Tradition doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is control. This wasn't just about Kenny Clark. It was about the entire NFL system. A machine that chews up its players and spits them out when their contracts no longer suit the math. Clark's trade was a reminder that no matter how beloved, how essential, how loyal a player may be in the eyes of ownership, they were ultimately expendable. And perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all. Fans had placed their trust in the very executives who now tore their hearts out. The same front office that spoke of building for the future had shown their future was built not on players, but on cold equations. Yet in that arrogance, they underestimated something crucial. They believed Kenny Clark would take the trade as just another transaction, just another chapter in the business of football. They believed the story ended in the boardroom, in numbers crunched and contracts signed. But Clark was no pawn. He was no disposable piece. And as the executives plotted their next move, Clark himself was preparing a response that no one could have predicted.